A big development tonight on a major story south of our border with international ramifications. The FBI has arrested the suspect behind the Pentagon leaks. Jack Teixeira, as you heard there, a 21-year-old member of the Air Force National Guard, was taken into custody just hours ago. Investigators believe he led the online group where the documents were posted. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland says Teixeira will be charged with the unauthorized removal of classified national defense information. The leaked intelligence includes sensitive information related to Ukraine's defense capabilities and vulnerabilities. Leon Panetta is a former U.S. Secretary of Defense and former CIA director under President Barack Obama. He's the chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. Hi, Secretary Panetta. Pleasure to welcome you to our program.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for making the time. Secretary, I want to start off and just ask from your perspective how significant it is that an arrest has now been made.
Well, I think it's very significant and very important because obviously the more time that passed that we didn't know exactly what happened here, the greater the danger that, that greater damage could be done to our national security. So I'm pleased that they made an arrest. I am concerned that what it points out is that the insider threat can be as dangerous as the outsider threat when it comes to those that can endanger our national security by the release of classified information.
What is your assessment at this point of the damage to national security that was done by the release of this material?
Well, that obviously needs to be assessed here, but there's no question that it does damage to the sources that are out there putting their lives on the line in order to gather this intelligence. They become a lot more vulnerable as a result of this release. Secondly, it damages our credibility and our reputation, particularly with regards to information related to our allies that is sensitive. So that impacts. It impacts because this is timely information and could certainly affect military decisions, particularly with regards to the Ukraine. So there are a number of ways that the release of this kind of very sensitive, highly classified information could damage our national security.
You mentioned some of the intelligence around Ukraine, and in particular, I wanted to get your perspective on the military information that was released, the strategic information that was out there. I interviewed the Prime Minister of Ukraine a few days ago on the heels of the release of these leaks, and I got to tell you, he did not want to acknowledge the substance of them, I think, to a certain degree, understandably so, and really tried to downplay, for example, part of the leaks that talked about vulnerabilities in defending their airspace. I mean, the potential for damage to Ukraine in the release of some of their own military strategies and vulnerabilities, I'd love to get your perspective on that. I imagine, I sort of ascertained from him that it was not negligible.
Well, it's timely intelligence. It's been gathered over the last couple months, and it relates to the present situation in the Ukraine. It does describe both the strengths and weaknesses of the Russian military, but it also describes the strengths and weaknesses that are facing Ukraine. And there's no question in my mind that from a military point of view, that decisions have to be adjusted based on the release of that information. I think in the end, my hope is that Ukraine can keep its eye on the target. It does have a challenge in establishing an important offensive against the Russians. I think that's critical as to where this war goes. So I'm hopeful that Ukraine can keep its eye on the target, can stay focused on putting together a military offensive that can hopefully drive the Russians out of the Donbass area.
You mentioned, though, that, and I'd love to know from your perspective, just given your experience in the field of defense, how much the Ukrainians will have to pivot as a result of this. I know CNN is reporting, for example, sources that say they have already altered some of their military strategy.
Now, I would not be surprised if that were the case. I mean, it depends on what plans they had in place with regards to this offensive, what area they were targeting, what kind of information came out with regards to those particular areas. And I think that military commanders have a responsibility to take the release of that kind of information and turn it to their own benefit. I mean, they can basically play a game here based on the fact that if others think they are particularly weak in certain areas, they can say nothing about it and then ultimately strengthen those positions so that the enemy would be thrown off guard. So there's a lot of approaches here that can make use of this kind of release of information.
Secretary, I want to circle back to, on the substance of the leak itself, the comments you made earlier around the threat from inside versus outside. In particular, the New York Times is describing the individual arrested as a 21-year-old Air National Guardsman. Just as, you know, as somebody who was Secretary of Defense, I can see you shaking your head there. What does that tell you?
Well, this is a 21-year-old Air Force Guardsman, you know, located in Massachusetts. And the question you have to ask is, why was somebody at that low level entitled to look at highly classified information? That's the first question. The second question is that if you're going to provide that kind of information, there ought to be others in the room who are making sure that the information is secure, that he doesn't have the opportunity to make photographs of that information, that he's not on his own, that he cannot just fold his paper up and then distribute it elsewhere. So there has to be better security with regards to how this information is provided. And then thirdly, you know, very frankly, I don't think that individuals at that level are entitled to some of the highly classified information that was released. They have no business knowing what our allies know or don't know. There are other areas that they have no business knowing that doesn't relate to their activities or their duties. So I think there are 3 or 4 areas that have to be looked at very closely by the Pentagon to make sure that we never repeat this mistake again.
Does it point to a wider problem from your perspective that this individual would have had any way of getting a hold of this information?
Well, there's no question that, as I said, I'm not sure I understand why somebody at that level had access to the level of classified information that was involved here. They have no business having access to that kind of information. And if they do, then there should be a superior officer in the room to make damn sure that that information is secure. So there's a lot of questions here that need to be looked at very closely by the Pentagon to make sure that we protect the kind of highly classified information that sources out there gather in order to make sure that we are equipped with the very best intelligence we need to make decisions at a high level, not at a level that involves somebody who's 21 years old and is an Air Guardsman.
Secretary Panetta, I'll leave it there. Really appreciate your insights today. Thank you.
You bet.